There's a cardiologist named Pim van Lommel who spent decades studying something his colleagues mostly refused to take seriously. He worked in a hospital in the Netherlands, and over years of practice, he kept encountering patients who had been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, flatlined, and who came back describing experiences, not vague impressions. Detailed, structured, consistent experiences, a tunnel light, deceased relatives, a life review, a border they were told not to cross. He decided to study it properly. He recruited 344 cardiac arrest survivors across 10 hospitals over 13 years. He interviewed them systematically. He followed up at 2 years and 8 years. He published the results in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals on earth, in 2001. 18% of patients reported some form of near-death experience. 4% reported a deep experience with multiple elements. The experiences were consistent across patients regardless of age, religion, education, or how long they had been clinically dead. He had no clean explanation. He still doesn't. The standard medical dismissal of near-death experiences is that they're hallucinations produced by a dying brain. Oxygen deprivation causes neurons to fire randomly. The tunnel is the visual cortex shutting down from the outside in. The life review is memory systems misfiring. The feeling of peace is endorphin release. These explanations sound reasonable until you look at the details. The experiences don't happen during the dying process when oxygen is depleting and neurons are misfiring. They happen during the period of clinical death itself, when the brain shows no measurable activity, EEG flatlines, no cortical activity, no dreams, no hallucinations are possible, in a brain showing zero electrical activity. And yet the experiences are more vivid and more real than ordinary life, more structured, more coherent, the opposite of what a randomly misfiring brain should produce. The verified out-of-body experiences are the part that's hardest to dismiss. Pam Reynolds was a musician who underwent brain surgery for a massive aneurysm. The procedure required her body temperature to be lowered to 60 degrees, her heart stopped, her blood drained from her brain. She was by any medical measure dead for a period of time. She later described watching the surgery from above. She described the specific surgical saw used to open her skull, a tool she had never seen before, and that was kept covered until she was already under anesthesia. She described specific conversations between the surgical team. She described the music playing in the operating room, all of it verified by the surgical team afterward. Of a brain with no blood, no electrical activity, and a body temperature of 60 degrees cannot generate hallucinations. It cannot generate anything. The life review element is one of the most consistent features across cultures and centuries. People describe watching their entire life play out, not as a passive observer, but as a simultaneous experience, every moment at once, and feeling the emotional impact not just from their own perspective, but from the perspective of everyone they affected. Every kindness you showed someone, you feel what they felt. Every cruelty, you feel that too. It's described not as judgment, but as information, a complete accounting of the relational impact of your existence. People who come back from this are changed. The research on near-death experiencers is consistent. Reduced fear of death, increased compassion, reduced materialism, increased sense of purpose. These changes persist for decades. They're not the result of a scary brush with mortality. They're the result of something specific that happened during the experience. Raymond Moody coined the term near-death experience in 1975 in a book called Life After Life. He collected accounts from over 150 people and identified the common elements: the tunnel, the light, the life review, the border, the return. He was a philosopher and physician who was careful about what he claimed. He never said he had proven life after death. He said the consistency of the accounts deserved serious investigation. The serious investigation has been slow coming. The subject sits in an uncomfortable space between medicine and metaphysics, and institutions don't like uncomfortable spaces, but it's happening. There are now research programs at major universities specifically studying consciousness near death. The question is being taken seriously by people who have the tools to study it properly. What I find most interesting is what near-death experiencers consistently say about what they were told during the experience. They're told, or they understand in the wordless way information arrives there, that love is the most important thing. Not accomplishment, not status, not the things most of us spend most of our time pursuing. Just how much you loved and how well. That's a remarkably consistent message from people who had no prior contact with each other. Across cultures, across centuries, every tradition that has described these experiences arrives at the same place. Whatever is happening there, whatever the mechanism, whatever the metaphysics, that message has been consistent for as long as humans have been coming back from the edge and trying to describe what they've found. You don't need to believe anything specific about what happens after death to find that worth sitting with. Just the fact that people go to that edge and come back saying the same thing, that the life review shows you the emotional ripple of every interaction you ever had, that what you're left with at the end is the question of how well you loved. That's worth taking seriously regardless of what you think the experience actually is. Let that settle as you drift off. You're not anywhere near that edge tonight. You're warm, you're safe, the body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Whatever's on the other side of sleep is gentle. It always has been. Every night of your life, you've gone there and come back. Tonight is no different. Just rest. In 1953, the director of the CIA authorized a program so disturbing that when it was finally exposed decades later, the agency destroyed most of the files. It was called MK Ultra. And what happened under that program, conducted by the United States government on American and Canadian citizens, many of whom had no idea what was being done to them, is one of the most thoroughly documented examples of institutional evil in modern history. Not alleged, not conspiracy theory. Documented, confirmed, admitted under oath before the United States Senate in 1977. The program ran for over 20 years. It involved at least 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, and CIA safe houses. It used LSD, mescaline, heroin, barbiturates, electroconvulsive therapy, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, psychological torture, and combinations of all of the above. The goal was mind control. Specifically, could you break a human mind down completely and rebuild it to order? Could you create an assassin who wouldn't remember killing? Could you extract information from a prisoner without them knowing they'd given it? The context matters. This was the early Cold War. The CIA believed the Soviets and Chinese had developed techniques for brainwashing prisoners. The term itself came from this period. American POWs in Korea had come back making statements that seemed impossibly contrary to their beliefs and training. The intelligence community was convinced the enemy had cracked something about the human mind that America hadn't, so they started their own program, and they decided that the normal rules didn't apply, that the stakes were high enough to justify experimenting on people without their knowledge or consent. Sidney Gottlieb ran it, a chemist, a man who by all accounts genuinely believed he was serving his country. He approved experiments that included dosing unwitting subjects with LSD for weeks at a time, subjecting psychiatric patients to drug-induced sleep for months, installing electrodes in people's brains, running what were called psychic driving experiments, playing recorded messages on loop to patients, kept in drug-induced stupors for weeks or months to try to erase their personalities and implant new ones. Frank Olson was a CIA biochemist who was dosed with LSD without his knowledge at a retreat in 1953. He had a severe psychological crisis. 9 days later, he fell from a window of a New York hotel room and died. It was ruled a suicide. His family never believed it. In 1994, his body was exhumed. A forensic examination found evidence of a blow to the head before the fall. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide. Nobody was ever charged. His son Eric spent decades pursuing answers. What he eventually concluded, and the evidence he assembled is substantial, is that his father had become a liability, that he had witnessed or learned things about the program that the CIA couldn't risk becoming public, that he was murdered to keep him quiet. Frank Olson's case is as well documented as any in this history, and it has never been resolved. The Montreal experiments were among the worst. Ewan Cameron was a prominent psychiatrist, president of the American Psychiatric Association, president of the World Psychiatric Association, respected, credentialed, and running experiments at McGill University, funded by the CIA, that amounted to systematic psychological destruction of his patients. He believed he could erase mental illness by erasing the personality entirely and starting fresh. To do this, he kept patients in drug-induced sleep for months. He bombarded them with electroconvulsive therapy at doses many times the standard amount. He played recorded messages to them thousands of times. He used sensory deprivation tanks. His patients emerged, destroyed, incontinent, unable to remember their own names, unable to recognize their families. Some never recovered. These were people who had come to a hospital seeking treatment for depression or anxiety. They left without their minds. The Canadian government eventually settled with survivors. The CIA paid out quietly. Cameron died before facing any legal consequences. The Senate hearings in 1977 were triggered by a journalist named Seymour Hersh, who broke the story in the New York Times. CIA Director Stansfield Turner testified. He confirmed the program existed. He confirmed the files had been destroyed in 1973 by Richard Helms, the outgoing CIA director, specifically to prevent them from being subpoenaed. What survived was 20,000 documents that had been misfiled in a financial records building and missed the destruction order. What those documents revealed was enough to confirm the scope, enough to confirm the methods, enough to make clear that what had been destroyed was almost certainly worse. What happened to the science of mind control after MKUltra is genuinely unclear. The official position is that the program ended and nothing useful was ever developed, that it was a dead end, that the CIA concluded you can't actually reliably control a human mind. Some researchers think that conclusion is itself disinformation, that the program went deeper underground, that the techniques refined in those years became the foundation of interrogation methods used in later decades, methods that look remarkably similar to what was being developed in the 50s and 60s. There's no way to know the files were destroyed. What I keep coming back to is the ordinariness of the people involved. Sidney Gottlieb grew up poor in the Bronx. He had a club foot and a stutter. He kept goats. He was, by accounts, a genuine idealist who believed in what he was doing. Ewan Cameron genuinely believed he was advancing psychiatry. The horror of MKUltra isn't that it was run by monsters, it's that it was run by people who convinced themselves the ends justified the means. People who built institutional structures that made atrocity routine. That's not a historical curiosity. That's a warning about what institutions can become when accountability disappears. Let that thought settle and then release it. You don't have to carry the weight of what people are capable of tonight. The darkness outside is just darkness. The quiet is just quiet. Rest now. In 1999, a Norwegian skier named Anna Bagenholm fell through ice into a frozen stream while skiing in the mountains. She was trapped under the ice for 80 minutes. By the time rescuers pulled her out, her core body temperature was 13.7 degrees Celsius. Normal human body temperature is 37 degrees. 13.7 is the lowest recorded body temperature anyone has ever survived. Her heart had stopped. She had no pulse, no breathing. By every conventional measure, she was dead. The rescue team kept resuscitating her anyway. They got her to a hospital where a team of 37 medical personnel worked on her for 9 hours. Slowly, painstakingly, they warmed her blood using a heart-lung bypass machine. Her heart restarted. She made a full recovery. She went back to work as a radiologist. She is alive today. The reason Anna Bagenholm survived is the same reason cold water drowning victims sometimes survive after 40 minutes underwater, while warm water drowning victims rarely survive. Past 5 cold slows everything down, including the processes that kill you. When your body temperature drops, your metabolism slows dramatically, your brain requires less oxygen, your cells enter a kind of suspended state, still alive, still capable of recovery, but running at a fraction of normal speed. The cold that's killing you is simultaneously protecting you from the dying. There's a phrase hypothermia researchers use, you're not dead until you're warm and dead, meaning you don't give up on a hypothermia victim until you've warmed them to normal temperature and the heart still won't restart, because the heart that won't beat at 13 degrees might beat perfectly well at 37. The stages of hypothermia are worth understanding because they're counterintuitive in a way that kills people. Mild hypothermia starts at around 35 degrees. You shiver violently, your body is doing exactly what it should, generating heat through muscle movement. You're cold and miserable, but you're fine if you get warm. Moderate hypothermia below 32 degrees is where things get strange. The shivering stops not because you're warming up, because your muscles have depleted their energy stores and can no longer sustain it. You feel suddenly calm, warm. Even people at this stage often start removing their clothing, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. Researchers think it's caused by the blood vessels near the skin suddenly dilating, flooding the surface with blood that feels warm, even as the core temperature continues to drop. People have been found frozen to death, half undressed in the snow. Terminal burrowing is another phenomenon that researchers only recently documented people in the final stages of hypothermia, just before losing consciousness. Sometimes crawl into small enclosed spaces, under beds, into cupboards, behind furniture. The behavior is so consistent that researchers think it's an ancient instinct activating at the moment of perceived death. Small mammals instinctively burrow when dying. Something in the human brain reaches back to that. People have been found frozen in the most unlikely places for this reason. The body at the edge of death is doing things the conscious mind has no access to. The cold affects the brain in ways that are fascinating beyond the survival context. Mild cold exposure, not hypothermia, just being genuinely cold, increases norepinephrine levels in the brain by up to 300%. Norepinephrine is involved in focus, attention, mood regulation. It's part of why cold showers have the effect they do. Part of why people who regularly expose themselves to cold report improvements in mood and mental clarity. There's also a documented effect on pain. Cold activates the same pathways as opioid painkillers. Not metaphorically, the same receptors, the same neural pathways. Cold water immersion has been shown to produce pain relief comparable to moderate doses of opioids. In some studies, your body has a pharmaceutical cabinet. Cold is one of the keys. Wim Hof has made a career out of demonstrating what cold exposure can do to the human body. He's climbed Everest in shorts. He's run a half marathon barefoot in the Arctic. He's sat in ice baths for hours. He holds multiple world records for cold exposure. More interesting than the records is the science that followed him. Researchers at Radboud University injected Hof and trained practitioners of his method with bacterial endotoxin, essentially a controlled dose of what makes you feel terrible when you have an infection. Normally, the body responds with fever, chills, nausea. The immune response is automatic and uncontrollable. Hof's group showed dramatically reduced immune response, less fever, less nausea, faster recovery, and when the researchers looked at their blood work, they found evidence of voluntary control over the autonomous nervous system, something that was supposed to be impossible. The autonomic nervous system is called that because it operates automatically outside conscious control. Apparently, that's not entirely true. The relationship between cold and sleep is something researchers have understood for decades, but most people ignore. Your body temperature needs to drop about 1 to 2 degrees to initiate sleep. That's not a side effect of sleep, it's a prerequisite. The cooling triggers the cascade of hormonal and neurological changes that produce sleep. This is why sleeping in a hot room is harder. Why a cool bedroom around 18 to 19 degrees Celsius consistently produces better sleep in studies. Why a warm bath before bed paradoxically helps you sleep. The bath raises your surface temperature, your body compensates by dilating blood vessels and dumping heat, and the resulting drop in core temperature helps initiate sleep. You're doing a version of this right now. The room is cooler than your body, your surface temperature is dropping, the core cooling is beginning, the sleep architecture is assembling itself. You don't have to do anything with that information. Just notice that your body is already doing exactly what it needs to do. The cold and the dark, doing their quiet work, the system running the protocol it's run every night of your life. Let it. You wake up in the dark and you can't move. Not a little stiff, not groggy, completely paralyzed, every muscle locked. You can breathe but barely, you can move your eyes but nothing else responds. And in the corner of the room or at the foot of the bed or sitting on your chest, there's something there. Not a dream, you're awake, you can see the room, you can see the ceiling, you can see your own hands lying motionless beside you, and there's a presence, sometimes a dark figure, sometimes something pressing down on you, sometimes just a sense of malevolent attention, so powerful, it feels physical. And then it's gone and you can move again and you lie there in the dark wondering what just happened. Sleep paralysis has been documented across every culture in recorded history. The ancient Chinese called it ghost oppression. In Newfoundland, it's called the old hag, a witch who sits on your chest in Brazil. The pisadera, a crouching figure on the roof who descends to crush sleeping people. In Turkey, the karabasan. In Japan, kanashibari, bound in metal. Every culture, every century, the same experience, a figure, a presence, paralysis, terror. The neuroscience explanation is clean. During REM sleep, your brain paralyzes your voluntary muscles. This is normal and essential. It stops you from acting out your dreams. Occasionally, the transition out of REM sleep is incomplete. The paralysis persists for seconds or minutes after you've regained consciousness. You're awake, but your body is still in REM lockdown. That explains the paralysis. It doesn't fully explain the figure. The sensed presence during sleep paralysis isn't random. It's remarkably consistent. Researchers have cataloged the phenomenology, and it breaks into 3 clusters. The intruder, a sense that something has entered the room, footsteps, a figure in the doorway or corner watching. The incubus, something on the chest, weight, pressure, difficulty breathing. The classic old hag experience. The vestibular motor, out-of-body sensations. Floating, flying, the sense of leaving the body. What's interesting is that these clusters correspond to specific neurological events. The intruder experience correlates with hypervigilance in the amygdala, the threat detection center, firing in a state between sleep and wakefulness and generating a threat signal without a source. The brain interprets unexplained threat signals as a presence. The incubus experience is partly positional. Sleeping on your back makes it more likely, and partly the REM paralysis of the chest muscles being misinterpreted as external pressure. The brain is generating the experience from its own alarm systems, but that doesn't make it less real to the person experiencing it. The shadow people phenomenon extends beyond sleep paralysis. People report seeing dark human-shaped figures in peripheral vision during waking hours, standing in doorways at the edge of rooms, gone when you look directly at them. Some researchers think this is a related phenomenon. The same hyperactive threat detection system that generates the intruder during sleep paralysis occasionally misfires during wakefulness. The brain generates a figure at the edge of perception, specifically in peripheral vision, where threat detection is most sensitive, and then fails to find it when the high-resolution central vision scans. Others point out that shadow people sightings cluster around sleep deprivation, extreme stress, and certain neurological conditions, states where the boundary between sleep and waking is already blurred. The explanation and the experience coexist uncomfortably. You can understand exactly what your brain is doing and still be terrified when it happens. What nobody has fully explained is the cross-cultural consistency of the figure. If the brain is generating a threat signal and the mind is constructing a figure to explain it, why does that figure look the same across cultures that have had no contact with each other? Why is it always humanoid, always dark, always associated with malevolent intent? Why does the old hag in Newfoundland look like the Karabasan in Turkey? The skeptical answer is that the human threat detection system is universal. We all evolved to fear the same things, primarily other humans in the dark. And so the brain consistently generates human-shaped threats. That's probably right. But it's interesting that the universal threat the human brain generates at the edge of sleep looks so specifically like something that has been described in every culture as a visitor from somewhere else. Henry Fuseli painted it in 1781, The Nightmare, a woman lying in a contorted sleep, a goblin-like figure crouched on her chest, a horse's head emerging from dark curtains in the background. It's one of the most reproduced paintings in history. When people first see it, they often say it looks exactly like what they experienced. A painting from 1781, it looks like what you experienced last Tuesday. That continuity is worth something, even if you can't quite say what. The interesting thing about sleep paralysis is that experienced practitioners, lucid dreamers, certain meditation traditions, some cultures that work deliberately with the hypnagogic state describe learning to not resist it, to relax into the paralysis instead of fighting it, to treat the figure as something to be curious about rather than terrified of. When you stop fighting the paralysis, the terror decreases. When the terror decreases, the figure often changes, becomes less threatening, sometimes disappears entirely. The monster responds to how you meet it, which is true of more than sleep paralysis. You're in the safe version of this right now. The transition into sleep, the hypnagogic edge where the brain starts generating its own content. Whatever appears at the edges of your perception tonight is yours. Your brain, your imagery, your version of the dark. Nothing is there that you didn't bring, and most of what you brought is fine. Just drift. Let the figures do what figures do. They always dissolve by morning. There's a man named Noland Arbaugh who became the first human being to have a computer chip implanted in his brain by a company called Neuralink. He's 29 years old. He was paralyzed from the shoulders down in a diving accident 8 years ago. In January 2024, surgeons placed a device the size of a coin into his motor cortex, the part of the brain that controls movement, with 1,024 electrodes threading into the neural tissue. And then he moved a cursor on a screen with his thoughts. Not a joystick, not a button, his thoughts. He played chess, he played video games, he streamed for hours online. He did things he hadn't been able to do in 8 years using nothing but his intention and a chip in his brain. That is not science fiction that happened. It's documented, there's video. Scenario Neek isn't the first brain-computer interface the field has been developing for decades earlier. Devices called Utah arrays have allowed paralyzed patients to control robotic arms and computer cursors since the early 2000s. Researchers at BrainGate have been doing this work for 20 years. What Neuralink brings is scale and engineering refinement. The earlier devices had 100 or so electrodes. Neuralink has over 1,000. More electrodes means more resolution. More resolution means more precise reading of neural signals. And the surgical robot that implants it, developed specifically for this, places each electrode with a precision no human hand could match. The device is also fully wireless, no wires through the skull, no external hardware hanging off the head, a small disc under the scalp that communicates via Bluetooth. You charge it like a hearing aid. Elon Musk's stated goal for Neuralink is not just helping paralyzed people, that's phase one. The broader vision is something he calls achieving symbiosis with artificial intelligence. The argument goes like this: AI is going to become more capable than humans at essentially everything. The danger isn't that AI becomes hostile, it's that it becomes so much more capable that humans become irrelevant. A high bandwidth brain-computer interface could allow humans to merge with AI systems to think at the speed of machines, to access the sum of human knowledge as immediately as you access your own memories. Not using a phone, not typing a query, thinking it and having the answer arrive. Musk calls the current situation, humans communicating with computers through keyboards and screens, essentially a bottleneck. The bandwidth of our output is limited to how fast we can type or speak, but the bandwidth of our thought is orders of magnitude higher. A direct neural interface eliminates that bottleneck. The philosophical implications of this are not small. You like oh, I'm sorry. If you can read thoughts with sufficient resolution, what happens to privacy? Not privacy in the sense of what's on your phone. Privacy in the deepest sense, the inviolability of the space inside your own skull. If brain-computer interfaces become common, and some people have them and some people don't, what happens to the cognitive gap between those populations? Is it a medical device or an enhancement? Who gets access? Who decides? These questions don't have answers yet. The technology is moving faster than the ethical framework. There are researchers who think Musk's timeline is dramatically optimistic and the vision of full neural symbiosis is decades away. If it arrives at all, the brain is not a static circuit board. It's a living system that changes constantly. Getting 1,000 electrodes to maintain stable contact with neurons that are always moving, always growing, always changing is an engineering challenge that may not have a clean solution. There's also the question of what the long-term effects of having foreign objects in brain tissue are. Scar tissue forms, the immune system responds, the signal degrades over time. These are real problems that the current generation of devices hasn't solved. But the skeptics said similar things about the original pacemaker, about cochlear implants, about deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, a therapy that involves implanting electrodes in the brain and has transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of patients. The history of neurotechnology is the history of people saying this is impossible and then someone doing it. What I find most interesting is what Nolan Arbaugh said about the experience, not the technical capabilities, the feeling of it. He said it felt natural almost immediately. that moving the cursor with his mind stopped feeling like operating a device and started feeling like moving a limb. That the distinction between his intention and the cursor's movement collapsed. The brain adapted. It incorporated the interface. It treated the external technology as an extension of itself, which is what the brain does with every tool we've ever used. Experienced musicians show neural adaptations where the instrument becomes incorporated into the body schema. The same thing happens with cars for experienced drivers. The brain has always been reaching out through our tools and treating them as extensions of itself. Neuralink is just a more direct version of something we've always done. Somewhere between where we are now and wherever this is going, there's a question about what makes us human that's going to need answering. Not in an abstract philosophical way, in a practical, legal, and ethical way. When does augmentation stop being treatment and start being something else? When does the merged mind stop being one person and start being something we don't have a word for yet? Those questions are coming. They're already here in early form, but not tonight. Tonight, you're just a brain in a body, in a bed, unaugmented, fully biological, running the same hardware your ancestors ran, which turns out to be extraordinary enough on its own. Rest now. The future can wait until morning. The most dangerous animal on Earth kills around 750,000 people every year. Not sharks. Sharks kill about 10 people a year globally, not lions or tigers or bears, not crocodiles, not hippos, not any of the things that live in the part of your brain labeled things that will eat me. The mosquito, a single insect weighing 2 milligrams. So fragile. You can kill one with your thumb. So ancient, they've been around for over 100 million years, and in that time they have killed more humans than every war ever fought combined, more than every natural disaster, more than every predator, more than everything else. Through malaria alone, one disease carried by one genus of mosquito, they kill somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people every year. Add dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika, West Nile, encephalitis, and the number climbs further. The total death toll from mosquito-borne illness across human history is estimated at somewhere around 50 billion people. 50 billion? The mechanism is elegant in a terrible way. The mosquito doesn't kill you directly. It just drinks a tiny amount of your blood and moves on. But in doing so, it transfers whatever it picked up from the last person or animal it fed on directly into your bloodstream. It's an involuntary blood-sharing network connecting every warm-blooded creature in its range. Malaria parasites, Plasmodium, have been co-evolving with mosquitoes for millions of years. They've gotten very good at this. When an infected mosquito feeds, the parasites migrate specifically to the salivary glands and are injected with the saliva. They've essentially hijacked the mosquito's feeding behavior as their own transport system. And then inside the human host, they do something remarkable. They hide inside red blood cells and liver cells, invisible to the immune system, replicating, bursting out, infecting more cells, cycling through the bloodstream in waves that produce the characteristic fever cycles of malaria. The parasite is not trying to kill you. A dead host is a dead end. It's trying to make you sick enough that a mosquito will find you lying still and easy to feed on. The second most deadly animal is the freshwater snail. Not a predator, not venomous, a snail. It carries a parasitic flatworm called schistosoma that infects around 200 million people annually and kills tens of thousands. The parasite burrows through skin during contact with contaminated fresh water. It migrates through the bloodstream, matures, and lays eggs that lodge in organs and cause chronic disease. It's mostly a disease of poverty, of communities that have no choice but to use contaminated water sources for bathing, washing, drinking. Number 3 is the human. We kill each other at a rate that puts every predator to shame, around 400,000 homicides annually globally, plus war, plus the vast slow violence of preventable disease and poverty. Then dogs, through rabies transmission, primarily in developing countries, around 60,000 deaths a year. Then tsetse flies, assassin bugs, freshwater snails, roundworms, tapeworms. The things that actually kill humans are almost entirely invisible. The shark statistic is worth sitting with, specifically because of the gap between perception and reality. In the year 2001, the United States recorded 47 shark attacks. The same year, falling out of bed killed about 450 Americans. Your bed is roughly 10 times more dangerous than the ocean. We spend enormous psychological energy fearing sharks. There's an entire industry of media designed to exploit that fear while completely ignoring the statistical reality of what actually threatens us. The brain didn't evolve to assess statistical risk accurately. It evolved to respond to things that look threatening. A shark looks threatening. A mosquito doesn't. A snail definitely doesn't. The mismatch between what scares us and what actually kills us is one of the more consistent features of human cognition. Cone snails are worth a mention just for the sheer unfairness of them. They live in tropical waters and look beautiful, ornate shells, slow-moving, seemingly harmless. They hunt by extending a proboscis that can reach any part of their shell and injecting a harpoon-like tooth carrying conotoxin. The venom is a cocktail of hundreds of compounds that disrupt neural transmission. There's no anti-venom. In serious envenomations, the victim becomes progressively paralyzed and dies of respiratory failure. The whole process can take hours, during which the person is fully conscious. People pick them up on beaches because they look pretty. The box jellyfish has enough venom to kill 60 adults. It has 24 eyes arranged in 4 clusters. Despite having no brain, it can navigate around objects, responds to light and shadow, and hunts actively. It's one of the most venomous creatures on Earth, and it does all of this without a central nervous system. The ocean is full of things like this. Things that are simultaneously beautiful and extraordinarily dangerous and operating by rules completely different from anything on land. What I find fascinating about this whole picture is what it says about the difference between the world as it appears and the world as it is. The things that look dangerous often aren't. The things that don't look like anything, a mosquito landing on your arm, a snail in a river, those are the ones that have shaped the trajectory of human history, that have determined which civilizations rose and which collapsed, that have killed more conquerors than all the armies they faced. Alexander the Great probably died of typhoid. Genghis Khan's armies were stopped in part by plague. The Spanish conquest of the Americas was completed not by soldiers but by smallpox. The invisible things, the things too small to see, the things that don't look like threats, those are the ones that actually change everything. The air around you right now is full of things you can't see. Most of them completely harmless. And you've been breathing it your whole life without thinking about it, which is the right approach. Arrest now. The invisible world is doing its thing. Always is. There are currently around 80,000 people in solitary confinement in the United States. 80,000 people in cells, roughly the size of a parking space, 22 to 24 hours a day, alone for days, weeks, months, sometimes years, sometimes decades. The record in the United States is held by a man named Albert Woodfox, who spent 41 years in solitary confinement at Angola Prison in Louisiana. 41 years in a 6 by 9 foot cell for a crime that multiple courts found serious problems with the evidence for, and which Amnesty International called a miscarriage of justice. He was released in 2016 at the age of 68. He had spent more time in solitary confinement than any other prisoner in American history. What solitary confinement does to the human brain is not a matter of debate in neuroscience. It is one of the most well-documented forms of psychological damage that exists. The research is consistent across decades and continents. Stuart Gracian is a Harvard psychiatrist who has studied solitary confinement since the 1980s. He identified a specific psychiatric syndrome that develops in isolated prisoners: hypersensitivity to stimuli, ordinary sounds become unbearable, light becomes painful, perceptual distortions, walls appearing to breathe, objects changing size, paranoia. Cognitive impairment, difficulty concentrating, difficulty thinking in sequence, difficulty remembering, hallucinations. And in severe cases, a kind of cognitive collapse where the person can no longer maintain coherent thought at all. These symptoms develop rapidly, sometimes within days. The brain doesn't need months to start breaking down in isolation. It starts almost immediately. The reason is straightforward once you understand how the brain maintains itself. The brain is not a fixed structure. It's a dynamic system that requires constant input to remain functional. Social interaction, environmental stimulation, physical movements, sensory variety, these aren't luxuries, they're maintenance. The brain uses them to calibrate its own systems to maintain the neural pathways that don't get used to keep the architecture functional. Remove all of that and the brain starts to consume itself. Neural pathways that aren't being used begin to degrade. The sensory cortex, starved of input, starts generating its own, hence the hallucinations. The social brain, with nothing to process, starts misfiring, hence the paranoia. The prefrontal cortex, with no complex decisions to make, with no future to plan for, with nothing to regulate, starts to lose its grip on executive function. Isolation isn't just unpleasant, it's neurologically destructive in a way that's partly irreversible. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture has stated that solitary confinement beyond 15 days constitutes cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Beyond 15 days, the psychological effects become severe enough that the UN considers it torture. In this scenario in the United States, people routinely spend years in solitary. The legal standard in America is that punishment cannot be cruel and unusual. Courts have generally held that solitary confinement doesn't meet that threshold. The gap between what the science says about what it does to a human brain and what the legal system is willing to call cruel is one of the more striking examples of institutional indifference to evidence in modern governance. John McCain spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, a significant portion of that time in solitary confinement. He spent the rest of his life saying that the isolation was worse than the physical torture, that physical pain has an end and leaves the mind intact. That isolation attacks the thing that makes you yourself. He was one of the most vocal opponents of solitary confinement in the United States Senate, not on ideological grounds, on the grounds of personal experience with what it actually does. The prisoner's experience of time in solitary is something that's hard to convey and worth trying to understand. Without external reference points, without social interaction, without variation in environment, without events that mark the passage of time, the experience of time itself becomes distorted. Days blur into each other. The distinction between yesterday and a month ago collapses. Some long-term solitary prisoners describe losing track of time entirely. Not just not knowing the date, not knowing the season, not knowing how long they've been there. The human experience of time is constructed from events and interactions and the rhythm of a life lived among other people. Remove all of that and time stops making sense. Craig Haney at the University of California, Santa Cruz, has studied the psychological effects of imprisonment for decades. What he finds consistently is that the damage from solitary is real, measurable, and persistent. People who spend extended time in solitary show lasting cognitive impairment. Lasting difficulties with social interaction. The social brain atrophies from disuse the way a muscle does. Lasting hypersensitivity to stimulation, lasting psychiatric symptoms. They come out of it changed in ways that don't fully reverse. And then they're released into society and expected to function. What I keep returning to when I think about this is what it tells us about what humans actually need. We talk about food and shelter as basic needs. We talk about safety. We rarely talk about social connection as a biological necessity in the same category. But the solitary confinement research makes it impossible to avoid. Social connection isn't a preference. It isn't a comfort. It is as necessary to the functioning of the human brain as food is to the functioning of the body. Deprive someone of it systematically, and the brain breaks down in predictable, documented, measurable ways. Loneliness is not a feeling. It's a physiological state with physiological consequences, and we've built systems that deliberately impose it on tens of thousands of people. You're not alone right now, even in the quiet, even in the dark. There are people sleeping in the same city, in neighboring houses, the same building maybe. The world is full of other minds doing the same thing you're doing right now. That connection is real, even when you can't see it. Arrest in that. In 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi was having lunch with colleagues at Los Alamos, and the conversation turned to extraterrestrial life. Someone made a joke about flying saucers, and Fermi, out of nowhere, asked a question that has haunted physics and astronomy ever since. Where's everybody? That's it. That's the whole question. And the more you think about it, the more uncomfortable it becomes. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Our galaxy alone contains somewhere between 200 and 400 billion stars. A significant fraction of those stars have planets. A significant fraction of those planets are in the habitable zone, the range of distances from their star where liquid water can exist. The conditions for life as we understand it exist in billions of places in our galaxy alone. Even if life is extraordinarily rare, even if only 1 in a billion suitable planets develops life, and only 1 in a billion of those develops intelligent life, the numbers still produce thousands of civilizations in our galaxy that should have had billions of years head start on us. Where are they? The silence is the strange part. We've been broadcasting radio waves into space for over 100 years. Our signals have reached thousands of star systems. We've been listening for signals back since the 1960s with increasingly sophisticated equipment. The SETI program has scanned millions of stars. Nothing, complete silence. Not a single confirmed signal, not one artifact, not one megastructure spotted by our telescopes, not one probe, not one beam of light that couldn't be explained by natural processes. for a galaxy that should be teeming with civilizations, some of which are billions of years older than us. The silence is deafening. The proposed solutions to the Fermi paradox are called great filters. The idea is that something filters out civilizations before they become detectable, either behind us, meaning most civilizations never get to the point of being detectable, or ahead of us, meaning civilizations that reach our level tend not to survive much further. The behind us option is somewhat comforting. Maybe the filter is the development of complex eukaryotic cells, the kind with a nucleus which took 2 billion years to appear on Earth and might be extraordinarily rare. Maybe it's multicellular life. Maybe it's the leap to intelligence. If the filter is behind us, then we've already passed it, and the path ahead might be clear. The ahead of us option is terrifying. If the filter is ahead of us, it means that civilizations that reach our level, capable of radio transmission, capable of space travel, tend to destroy themselves. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence gone wrong, something that civilizations reliably do to themselves at roughly our stage of development. And we're approaching it. The rare Earth hypothesis says the filter might simply be the extraordinary specificity of conditions that allowed complex life on Earth. We're the right distance from a stable star of the right size and age. We have a large moon that stabilizes our axial tilt and prevents catastrophic climate swings. We have Jupiter positioned to act as a gravitational shield that deflects incoming asteroids. We have plate tectonics that cycles carbon and regulates temperature. We have an extinction event 66 million years ago that cleared the way for mammals. Remove any one of those factors, and the story of life on Earth looks very different. Maybe the combination of all of them is so improbable that we really are alone, or nearly alone, in the observable universe. That's a lonely thought, but it's also a clarifying one. It means this: all of this, every living thing, every experience, every moment of consciousness might be genuinely unique in the cosmos. The dark forest hypothesis is the most unsettling proposed solution, and it comes from Chinese science fiction writer Lu Xichin. The idea is that the universe is full of civilizations, but they're all hiding, that any civilization that broadcasts its location risks being destroyed by another civilization that detects it, that the rational strategy in a universe of limited resources and unknown others is silence and concealment. That the universe is a dark forest full of hunters who have all independently arrived at the same conclusion: make no noise, trust no one, shoot first. If this is true, the universe isn't empty, it's full, and every civilization in it has independently decided that the only way to survive is to go dark. And we've been broadcasting our location for 100 years. Stephen Webb cataloged 50 different solutions to the Fermi paradox in a book called If the Universe is Teeming with Aliens. Where is everybody? 50 separate attempts to explain the silence. They range from the mundane to the cosmic to the genuinely strange. One of them is that we're in a simulation, and the simulator hasn't populated the rest of the universe because there's no reason to. Another is that the universe is simply too young, that life is so new a phenomenon in cosmic terms that we're among the first. None of them are settled. None of them are proven. The silence remains. What I find beautiful about the Fermi paradox is that it's a question humanity can sit with. Honestly, we don't know. We've looked, we've listened, we've thought hard about it, and the honest answer is we have no idea. The universe might be full of life we haven't found. It might be empty except for us. Both possibilities are staggering. Look up sometime on a clear night. Every point of light is a sun. Most of those suns have planets. And somewhere in all of that, in that incomprehensible expanse of space and time, the question of whether anything looks back is genuinely open. That's enough to sit with. You don't need an answer tonight. The universe has been asking the question for 13 billion years. Can wait a little longer? Rest now. There's a language called Gugu Yimithir, spoken by an Aboriginal community in Queensland, Australia. It has no words for left and right. Not a missing vocabulary gap that speakers work around, a fundamental structural difference in how space is encoded. Gugu Yimithir speakers don't navigate by relative directions. Left of me, right of me, behind me, they navigate exclusively by cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, always in every context, at every scale. If you ask a Gugu Yimithir speaker where they put something, they don't say it's to my left. They say it's to the northwest. If they describe a person standing next to another person, they specify which is north and which is south. And they always know which direction is north. Without a compass, without a map, without thinking about it, the way you know which direction is forward. Researchers tested this. They took speakers to unfamiliar places, indoors, underground, in places designed to be disorienting. The speakers always knew which way was north, not approximately precisely. The language didn't just reflect a skill, it appeared to produce it. Growing up with a grammar that required constant cardinal orientation had built a navigational system in these speakers that people without that grammar simply don't have. Benjamin Lee Whorf was a fire inspector and amateur linguist in the early 20th century who developed what became known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The strong version of the idea is that language determines thought, that you can only think thoughts your language has words for, that speakers of different languages literally live in different cognitive worlds. The strong version turned out to be too strong. You can think about things. Your language doesn't have words for. Concepts can exist without labels. But the weak version, that language influences thought, shapes habitual patterns of attention, colors, perception in ways that are real and measurable, that has held up remarkably well. Color perception is one of the most studied examples. Russian has separate basic terms for light blue and dark blue, goluboy and siny. They're not shades of the same color the way light blue and dark blue are in English. They're categorically different colors in the way red and orange are different in English. And Russian speakers are measurably faster at distinguishing between light blue and dark blue objects than English speakers. Not because their eyes are different, because the categorical distinction in their language has sharpened their perceptual discrimination at that specific boundary. The language has tuned the visual system, the words have shaped what the eye effectively sees. Time is another domain where languages diverge dramatically, and the divergences appear to affect cognition. English speakers think of time as a horizontal line. The past is behind us, the future is ahead. We talk about looking forward to things, putting the past behind us, moving on. Mandarin speakers are significantly more likely to think of time vertically. Earlier events above, later events below, up is earlier, down is later. When researchers ask Mandarin speakers to arrange temporal sequences, the vertical arrangement comes much more naturally. Aymara speakers in the Andes have it almost exactly backwards from English. The past is in front of them. They can see it. It's known the future is behind, unseen, unknown. This maps onto a coherent logic that English doesn't capture at all. And the Hopi language notoriously encodes time not as a dimension you move through, but as something closer to a process of becoming something that is always manifesting rather than something that passes. How you experience the flow of time, the felt sense of past and future and now, may be partly shaped by the grammar of the language you think in. Lara Boroditsky at Stanford has spent her career documenting these effects, and the findings keep coming. Languages that use grammatical gender, where every noun is masculine or feminine, affect how speakers think about the objects those nouns refer to. Scenario: in Spanish, the word for bridge is masculine, el puente. In German, it's feminine, die Brücke. When Spanish speakers describe bridges, they use words like strong, towering, long. When German speakers describe bridges, they use words like beautiful, elegant, slender. Same bridges, same people looking at them. Different words for the object in their language and different aesthetic responses to the physical thing. The language isn't just labeling the world, it's tinting the glass through which the world is seen. What this means practically is something worth sitting with. Every language you speak gives you access to a slightly different version of reality. Not a different physical world, but a different set of habitual attentions, different categories, different ways of carving up continuous experience into discrete units. Bilingual and multilingual people often report that they feel slightly different depending on which language they're thinking in, that humor lands differently, that emotional nuance is easier to express in one language than another, that some things can only be said in one language because the other one doesn't have the right shape for the thought. There's a Japanese word, komorebi, that means the interplay of light and leaves when sunlight filters through trees. English doesn't have that word, which means English speakers have the experience but don't have the handle. The named thing and the unnamed thing are both real. But the named thing is somehow more available, more noticeable, more there. The language you think in right now is shaping what you notice and what you don't, what feels natural to say and what requires effort, how you divide up time and space and color and causality. And you mostly have no awareness of any of it. It's just how thinking feels from the inside. Let that go quiet now. Underneath the language, underneath the words and the categories and the grammar, there's something that doesn't need words at all. The breath, the warmth, the weight of the body, that part of you that existed before you had language. Still there, still working. No words required. You're somewhere you've never been before. Or a restaurant you just walked into for the first time, a street in a city you've never visited, a conversation with someone you just met, and suddenly, completely without warning, you have the overwhelming certainty that you have been here before, that this exact moment has happened, that you know what's coming next. And then it's gone. The feeling dissolves, you're back in the present, and the certainty was wrong. You haven't been here before. Nothing about the situation is familiar in any verifiable way. That's déjà vu. And roughly 60 to 80% of people report experiencing it. It's one of the most universal human experiences and one of the least understood. The name comes from French. Déjà vu, already seen, it was coined by a French philosopher named Émile Boirac in 1876. Before it had a name, people described the experience in ways that mapped directly onto spiritual and metaphysical frameworks. A memory of a past life, a glimpse through time, a moment of prophetic recognition. Having a name didn't explain it, it just made it easier to study. And studying it turned out to be remarkably difficult. Déjà vu is transient, unpredictable, and produces no external behavior. You can't induce it reliably in a lab, you can't measure it while it's happening. For a long time, the only data was self-report. People describing what they experienced after the fact. The most productive approach has come from studying people who experience déjà vu pathologically. Patients with certain forms of temporal lobe epilepsy have déjà vu as a seizure aura, a warning signal that a seizure is coming. For some of them, it's chronic and frequent, and because it occurs in a clinical setting, it can be studied in real time. What the research on these patients suggests is that déjà vu involves a mismatch in memory processing, specifically the familiarity signal that the brain generates. When it recognizes something fires without the corresponding retrieval of what's familiar, you get the feeling of recognition without the content of the memory. Normally, when you recognize something, both processes happen together. You feel familiar and you know why. You retrieve the specific memory. In déjà vu, the familiarity fires, but the retrieval fails. You feel like you've been here before, but you can't access the specific memory because there isn't one. Chris Moulin at the University of Grenoble has studied a condition called chronic déjà vu, where the malfunction is persistent rather than momentary. Patients with this condition experience constant, overwhelming familiarity. Everything feels like a memory. New experiences feel like recurrences. Some patients stop watching TV or reading newspapers because everything feels like something they've already seen. One of his patients was an elderly man who stopped going to the doctor because he was convinced he had already been to every appointment. He had no memory of the specific appointments. He just felt certain they had already happened. That patient gives you a window into what déjà vu actually is. It's not a real memory, it's the feeling of memory, the phenomenology of recognition generated without a corresponding real past experience. There's a theory called the dual processing theory that tries to explain the mechanism. Mm-hmm. The idea is that memory involves two separate systems running in parallel, one that retrieves specific memories and one that generates a general sense of familiarity. Usually they're synchronized in déjà vu. They come briefly out of sync. The familiarity system fires slightly ahead of the retrieval system, generating the feeling of recognition before the retrieval system can find what's being recognized and then failing to find anything, because there's nothing to find. It's a timing glitch, a momentary desynchronization in parallel processing, which is a satisfying mechanistic explanation that somehow doesn't fully capture what the experience feels like from the inside. What it feels like from the inside is stranger than a timing glitch. It feels like time folding, like the present moment rhyming with something you can't quite locate, like the universe briefly showing you its seams. Philosophers have been interested in déjà vu for exactly this reason. It's one of the few experiences that makes the normally invisible structure of consciousness briefly visible. It draws attention to the fact that your experience of the present moment is constructed, that recognition and familiarity are processes running in the background, usually invisible, and when they malfunction, you briefly see the machinery. Henri Bergson, the French philosopher who thought more carefully about time and memory than almost anyone, was fascinated by déjà vu. He thought it was a glimpse of the way memory actually works, not as a retrieval of past events, but as a constant process of the present moment splitting into past and present simultaneously. He thought déjà vu was what happened when that normally invisible process became briefly perceptible. There's something about deja vu that people consistently find either deeply unsettling or deeply comforting. The unsettling version, the sense that your reality might be glitching, that you might be in a loop, that something is wrong with the fabric of experience. The comforting version, the sense that you've been here before and it was fine, that this moment is somehow known, that you're on a path that has already been walked. Both responses are to the same experience. What differs is the interpretation. The hypnagogic state you're moving toward right now has something in common with deja vu. The edges between memory and imagination soften, fragments of experience from different times start to blend. The strict linear timeline of the waking mind relaxes. Things feel familiar that shouldn't. Places you've never been feel known. People who don't exist feel like old friends. That's not malfunction. That's the dreaming mind doing what it does, loosening the grip of linear time, letting the moments fold into each other. You've been here before. In the sense that the dark, the quiet, the letting go, this is the most familiar place there is. You've done this every night of your life. It always works out. Rest now. You already know how this ends.